If you look on your agendas for this afternoon, my name is Jennifer Stewart. I'm the Director of Quality Assurance and Accreditation here in Alvis. And what we're going to talk about today is several things with accreditation, compliance, audits, preparedness in your manuals, in your blue books. If yours is the same as this one here, under the table of contents, tab number 1. So, yeah, so like midway through, and then behind tab 1, there's the cover page says ACA accreditation process, audit ready every day. Find that. So the second page is kind of some of the highlights of the information we're going to be talking about this afternoon for the next hour or so. So I say, we're going to be interactive and try not to fall asleep, because if you hear that and you think about accreditation, audit processes and stuff, compliance, like, that's boring stuff, right? Well, like, tell me how to do house checks, tell me how to do case plannings, this is what I want to do. So hopefully, though, by the end of this, you're going to see how this all ties together to what you need to do in your position, whether you are a maintenance staff or you're working in the business office, in HR, or whether you're CRS or case manager. It doesn't matter. We're all intertied in this process and dependent on each other, and everybody to kind of play their roles so that we can be successful in that. So accreditation is, part of that is ACA, American Correctional Association. So who's heard of that before at all? Has some experience. So what do you know about that? See, I'm gonna make you speak. Told you.
Well, when I worked at the prison in Pickaway, I know that they had to do perform standards for audits, and it was, I think it was around March.
Okay.
And so basically it's like the ACA comes in and they check to make sure that everyone's following policy and procedures correctly, but you have to have evidence. So in the prison, they had to compile case plans and had all these documents and records to prove that they're doing what the policy is saying. I don't know how it works for halfway houses, but that's what I know about it.
Okay. Anybody else have, what knowledge or experience do you have with ACA? Anything else other than that? Because that's great, because you were actually at a facility that went through the process in AC. So tell me about that process. Were you involved in any of the preparations for that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I was shadowing the unit management chief, so she was in charge of all the case managers and unit managers of the institution. So we kind of helped her when she was telling the other case managers what she needed, but she had this big book like this and had to go through each thing, was reading policies and was teaching us what each policy meant. So for an instance, we would have to look up an inmate's number and verify that they're doing a certain number of programming and do all these different things to make sure it meets a requirement.
Right.
She was talking about just the importance of it, because if they come in and it's off or they don't have certain standards met, then you could get in trouble for that. So
yeah.
I guess that answers your question.
That's great. So a lot of times people are business forward and stuff, but actually having some experience going through the process. So ACA, as I said, is the American Correctional Association, and they are a private entity, a nonprofit that is concerned with everything that has to do with corrections. So we will talk today about kind of that standards and accreditation department, but they do training, professional development, publishing. They're involved in legislation and lobbying and different things when laws come up that have to do with correctional practices and security. And they are based just outside of Washington, D.C. They've been around for almost 150 years now, so they've been around a long time as an entity. And one of the things that you realize if you have, even nowadays, if you even are paying attention to the news, all this information on the news dealing with correctional facilities and stuff. There's been a few deaths this year of correctional officers in institutions. And so years ago, some people had decided, well, you know what, there's really not a common standard of really what a correctional facility would look like. So it would look different than it did in Ohio, than it does in Indiana, than it does in Texas and New York. And there was kind of no minimum. Everybody was kind of each to their own. And so what happened was the riots in Attica happened in the early 70s, and then that's when like things started happening within the field of corrections and saying, we need some standards, some expectations, some things that help develop what makes at least safe corrections. So these standards were developed. And here at Alvis, our standards manual is ACRS, and you'll see that on your notes. So those are Adult Community Residential Services standards. So basically they're the halfway house standards. She talked about Pickway as an institution. So what they're being audited on in an institution is different than what we get looked at here in community corrections because the goals are different. So security is really important in a prison environment, in a secure environment. Counts, things like that. So in the community, that security looks different. It's important to us as well, but our clients are going out into the community and we need to have a different type of accountability as opposed to making sure they don't go outside the fence line as they do in a prison. Well, we want them to go out into the community, just making sure that they come back and we have good accountability. So it looks different from these type of standards versus adults versus juvenile standards. So what we're going to focus on with adults versus juvenile is going to be different. Healthcare standards. There are correctional medical centers, healthcare providers. So making sure that those standards look different than they do in community. So right now there's about 33 different manuals and sets of audit standards, depending on what category of corrections you are. So there's adult parole and probation standards. There's parole board standards. So even non-secure residential facilities have an audit standards. So here at Alvis, as I said, we fall under the ACRS facility standards, and the standards are divided into two sets. There's mandatory standards and non-mandatory standards. So when you hear mandatory standards, what do you think of when you hear that?
Safety.
Things that have to be done.
Yep, you have to meet it. So safety. So what type of things, so going through the audit process, these mandatory standards, we have to meet them to get accredited. So what type of things would be so important that doesn't matter where your facility is located in the country, what type of other activities you do, what's so important that to get accredited, you have to meet these.
Basic human rights.
Well, that's very true. So give me some specifics. What's
Enough beds for how many people are in the house? Secure locks?
not a mandatory? So prison overcrowding is actually a really big issue right now, and they actually will double bunk people and triple bunk people. So it's not a mandatory. It'll be a standard, and we'll talk about standards, but it's not a mandatory standard.
How about humane treatment?
More specific.
No cruel and unusual punishment.
Okay, so things like use of force, things like that, so that we don't use force to make someone move. If force is used, it's justified for a certain instance, that it's not just because someone's not listening to you. If they're trying to harm themselves and you stop them from doing that, then that's a use of force, but it's a reasonable use of force to prevent them from doing harm to themselves. What other type of things?
It's like cleanliness, nutrition.
Nutrition, food service. So we have to provide food service and a menu that's approved by a licensed dietitian to meet minimal nutrition standards that are set. So that means, it's not a bowl of cereal 3 times a day or 2 times a day to meet those nutritional standards, that there is a minimum expectation for that. So we also look at things like fire safety and fire inspection, so that there's fire suppression equipment, fire extinguishers, there's fire alarms that are hardwired, so it's not like somebody can take a battery out of it and then the fire alarm's disabled and it doesn't work anymore. Having a suicide prevention plan, so I think you probably by now you guys have been trained on that this week, the suicide prevention plan, so that there's a plan in place and all the staff get trained on that. Things like vehicle safety and annual vehicle safety inspections. So we have a number of agency vehicles that staff use to transport clients or to go to appointments, So they get inspected to make sure they're safe and operational, and they meet those requirements as well. Things like tool control, toxic and caustic, so any chemicals that could be dangerous or harmful, that there's good control of them and accountability for those things. Sharps, so if there's knives in the facility, there's, again, good accountability of those things. They have a log, they get signed out and signed back in if they're being used. So those type of things, there's actually 33 mandatory standards right now in the ACRS manual that, as I said, we're required to meet if we want to go through this accreditation process. Okay, so that means that, again, whether we're in Ohio or we're in some other part of the country, everybody has to meet those. And those are the things that, it doesn't matter how great your programming is or how awesome your case management staff is, that if you don't meet those basic safety issues, and most of them fall under the category of basic life safety, so to make it the environment safe for the clients, residents, as well as the staff and community. So those things like emergency plans and controls of knives and sharp objects and things like that. So like it's just a safe environment, so then you can do those other programming issues and other safety issues and other things that we want to help the clients achieve while they're with us. Okay, so those mandatory standards we have to meet right off the bat. So non-mandatory standards are where the rest of them fall into. But non-mandatory standards does not mean optional. Sometimes people say, okay, mandatory standards, we have to meet those. But the non-mandatory standards are like, oh, well then that means we don't have to meet those because they're not mandatory. It's not really how it works. So as we talked about, so ACA developed these kind of as that minimum. You know, they're still important. There are 220 of these. So we went from 33 to 220 non-mandatory standards. And to even begin the process with ACA and do the accreditation, their expectation and requirement is that you meet at least 90% of those, okay? So you can't go around and say, okay, well this one's too hard, we're not gonna do this one, we like this one's easy to do, we're gonna do this, that one costs too much, we don't wanna do that, this is fun, we'll do this one, but not those four. So we don't get to pick and choose those type of things. We have to, right off the bat, have to meet at least 90%. But that's still a significant one, a percentage, a number of standards. But that's even to like start the process. The goal of ACA is to get you, and the expectation is to be at 100%. Because if they didn't think it was important and didn't have a good background and necessity, it wouldn't exist as a standard. So those 220 standards, if you do not meet them, and it's, say you need to have, you have to have case plans developed for all your clients within 14 days, okay? So they come in and they do an audit and you don't meet that. The expectation is you're gonna do a plan of action to say, okay, we're gonna correct this, because when you come back and re-audit it, we're gonna meet that standard. So their goal is to get you through that process to that 100% compliance, okay? There are some standards here and there that you can get waivers on if they're structural things, like we have some historic buildings that we can't do some modifications to, that we will get a waiver on if we can't meet that standard. But that's completely up to ACA in that process if we get awarded that. So they could require us to do a plan of action, but they try to be pretty reasonable with those. But again, so these standards exist because they're kind of minimum. So you'll hear things like, you'll learn more, and as you get in the facility, we have a lot of people who are coming in and doing inspections. So we contract with the state of Ohio, Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, BCS, Bureau of Community Sanctions. They come in, they do inspections of us, and come in and do site visits. Bureau of Prisons, they come in and they do inspections and they do site visits and stuff. So they have their own rules that we have to meet as well. One of those rules for both of them is that we're ACA accredited. So that's a contract requirement that we have with them, so that then they know that those standards and requirements are being looked at. So they don't have to worry as much about those, because then they want to look more at programming. They want to look more in depth at what specifically are you helping the clients accomplish while they're here. Doing more of the research-based outcome measure stuff. So I tell people like the ACA kind of gets you to that C level, that you're passing that, but that's kind of a minimum. We're meeting that, and we should meet it, and everybody should meet it. That's what gives you that good foundation. And then when the Bureau of Prisons and when DRC comes in, that's what's going to raise us up to those A and B level, because then we're going above and beyond and focusing on the programming and changing behaviors and helping clients be successful as they reintegrate, as opposed to making sure we have a safe environment and a good environment for our staff, for the clients, and for the community with the ACA standards. Okay? So any questions about any of that basis? So now that you know all of that, and I gave you an answer and I said, you know, our contracts require this and stuff, but what other reasons can you think of why we would go through this process? Because we've got 253 standards now that we have to get audited on and inspected on. So somebody's coming in to make sure we do those. Why would we do that? Well, we want money, huh? What are some other? Consistency. Consistency? Yep. What was that?
To avoid liability.
Liability. Great.
Quality of programs,
Absolutely.
outcome measures.
Right. Absolutely. Great answer. Sometimes people just look at me and they're like, I don't know why we do it. So there's several reasons. So it does. It helps us actually with liability and insurance. One of the questions on insurance applications is, are you ACA accredited? So ACA accreditation is recognized internationally as an accreditation, and it puts some teeth to what you do and that you've been inspected. So instead of us, the Alice leadership, sitting around in a meeting, or Alice Board of Directors sitting around in a meeting and telling us and saying, we do a good job, good for us, pat ourselves on the back and move on. It's professionals coming from the outside in corrections looking at our programming and looking at documentation to say, okay, where are you in relationship to these national standards, even international standards? So, I can't see your name, it looks like flower or a star. Ah,
Robin?
Robin said, I could see the other side of it. So as Robin said, they're looking at, when the audit process goes through, they're looking at proof. They want to see proof of what you're doing. So you have to have a policy and procedure that says you're doing it, but then ultimately, are you doing it? Are you following through with what you said you were going to do? So that's where all of you come into that process of, and your roles in being super important is everybody, us here at Stella, we can say, well, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we do. But you guys in the program stuff, we need you to do it so we can be successful in that. So making sure that, you know, this ties into, sometimes it gets overwhelming, like, oh, we've got to write this report, we've got to do this documentation stuff. But as you know, and you hear, you know, document it didn't happen. But making sure that we have those notes and that information so we can provide it come audit time. If there's a problem, if there's an inspection, if there is a liability issue that comes up, did we follow our procedure and do what we were supposed to do? That helps us in the end. It also gives us good support in the community, because the community recognizes, like, again, it's not just us, but it's somebody else. And so it helps our reputation within the community, that we can say that we're ACA accredited. And as I mentioned, it is required by our contractors, so it's something that if we're going to get funding and we're going to get paid, we have to maintain those contracts. We have to maintain our ACA accreditation. Okay? Any questions about any of that? We're talking a little bit about some of those specific standards of the division. And as we go through that, so just to kind of give you an idea of an overview of the type of things that we're looking at and ACA looks at when they come in. This ties into our policies and procedures that, again, you guys have been going through, and you've seen several of them in your manual this week. You've reviewed some of those mandatory standards and some of those things. You practiced some yesterday with different things. So what we're going to do is just talk about how they're divided. And the policy and procedure manual for Alice is on the Z Drive. It's available to any of you. So if you're in a facility and you have a question, or you need a little light reading because it's quiet and you're working third shift, you can browse through those and find some of those informations if you have questions about, you have a question about food service and menus, or about clients being able to do community time. Because, you've got different statuses. Let me check this out. So you can find that information in the policies and procedures, and they are divided and numbered according to your ACA standards. So we're going to go through those to at least give you an idea, so if you have questions or want to find something, you at least know where to start. So it is divided into 7 sections, those 253 standards. The first section is safety. And what type of things would we put in our safety section? Some of those mandatories that we talked about.
Yeah, someone protector,
Yep.
alarm, stuff like that.
Yep,
MSD.
that's next section.
Keeping weapons maybe out of the facilities.
Next section. So that's definitely in there. Next section is security. So in safety section, it's a lot of the emergency plans. If there's, we have to do fire drills. So we do monthly fire drills on all shifts to make sure everybody knows how to evacuate. We do disaster drills. So staff and clients know if there's a flood, if there's a tornado, things like that. We have to practice those. As well as things that hopefully don't happen. If there's a bomb threat, if there's a chemical spill, things like that. Our Allen Creek facility is close to train tracks. So if there's something that happens with a train accident or something goes wrong there, like we have plans that we have to be able to be prepared to address that and know if we need to relocate people and our clients, what does that look like? Also, so our vehicle safety is also in here. So those inspections, making sure that if a vehicle needs repaired, that those repairs are made. We don't continue to operate the vehicle if, like, the windshield wipers aren't working. There's a process for submitting a repair ticket, and we don't send somebody out in that van again until those repairs are made. Safe drinking water. That's one of the mandatories in here. So common sense, but it's been in the news a lot this last year. Safe drinking water, I said it's common sense sometimes we think, but making sure that the water that's provided is safe. And again, so ACA isn't going to tell you how you're going to do that. They don't say you have to provide safe drinking water from the water fountain or from a faucet. So what that looks like here in Columbus may look different than it looks like in rural Texas, where they don't have city water. So maybe they use a well system. And they've got, they have a well that they're getting their water supply from. So as long as you're providing safe drinking water, you can do it through bottled water and water dispensers. You can provide your safe drinking water that way. Just have to meet that standard and provide that. But part of what we have to do is be able to prove that we do. So when the auditors come in, they want to see proof. So what will we do to prove that we have safe drinking water? Would we give them something to drink from the faucet and hope they don't get sick?
Water quality test strips.
We would do like a water quality report. So we would give them a report showing them that the water's been tested and that it's safe to drink. Because what would happen is, maybe they have a little bit of flu already and we give them some water to drink and then they're not feeling so good. And then they're saying, well, your water's not safe. They'll tie it to the water, right? So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we're providing safe drinking water. As well as, once we go through the accreditation process, they come back every 3 years. So we have to show documentation for 3 years between audits. So it doesn't stop. We continue that accreditation, but we have to show that documentation for all 3 years. We can't save some water from year 1 and then save some more water for year 2 and save some more water for year 3 and then say, here, try them all, they're safe. We have to have that actual documentation showing that it's been tested and being able to prove, again, that we're doing and providing what the standard requires and what our policy and procedure requires. Okay? So section 2 is security. And And I said some things that will be in security section, so tool control, our sharps, inventories, key control, all of those things are part of security. What other things?
Set SDS sheets.
You know what, the more I think about it, I think that is one. I think I misspoke on that, because that's 1C17, sorry. So, I do actually know that. So, SDS sheets, they used to be MSDS sheets, if you know that language, material safety data sheets, now they're safety data sheets, and they're SDSs. So that is in safety, but security has our tools, our knives, our keys, are all those mandatories that are fall in here.
Weapon control.
Yes, weapon control. So all of the facilities have a gun lockbox in them. So if POs come in and they have a weapon on them, they have to lock up their weapon. They keep the key, but we don't allow them to be walking around the facility unless they're doing an arrest with their weapon on them. Okay? Staff don't bring weapons in, so ladies, even like mace, any of that personal safety stuff, it doesn't come into the facility, so make sure that you leave that at home. What else under security? So some of these things that you've talked about this week with accountability.
How about alarm systems and hand-downs?
Yep. Searches.
Ins and outs.
Accountability stuff. So searches, so making sure that contraband, we have contraband policy, there are limits, there are things that are prohibited from being in the facility. It's like staff with weapons, clients with weapons and things like that, but also other things, tattoo supplies, pornography, loose tobacco, things like Black and Miles, things like that, that are prohibited from being in the facility, they're contraband. So we do searches to control for those. So searches of the facilities, of common areas, of the rooms, and also pat downs and searches of the clients. We search cell phones to make sure that there's nothing inappropriate on cell phones, the client's cell phones, as well as their vehicles. If they have driving privileges and are operating vehicles, again, make sure there's nothing inappropriate or any type of contraband in those. So also heard sign in, sign out stuff. So accountability. So we're gonna do house checks and make sure that everybody who's supposed to be in the facility is in the facility. Our facilities are not locked from the inside, they're locked from the outside, so clients can walk out. The doors are alarmed, most of them, so we can get notified that's happened. But maybe somebody goes out for a smoke and they don't come back in. So we've got to do accountability checks and make sure that everybody's in the facility and accounted for that should be there. And then we have our process if they're not. But just because they're not in the facility too, our accountability responsibility doesn't end. So if they're out in the community, we're going to do phone calls, we're going to do monitor checks, make sure they're where they're supposed to be. As well as in this section, if there's clients on electronic monitoring. So we do have some programs and some clients on electronic monitoring that are out in the community. So make sure that we're watching that and making sure they're not somewhere where they're not supposed to be at a time they're not supposed to be there. Okay? So those security things have to do a lot with security inside the facility as well as providing that security to the community. So making sure too, as I said, that visitors, so making sure that people aren't coming into the facility who shouldn't be in there authorized. As I said, it's locked from the outside coming in. So we don't want anybody to just be able to walk into one of our facilities. So that's our security section. Section 3 is order. And this is a little bitty section. It's the smallest one, but it's super important. Because as you hear that like order, it's kind of hard to think about what that might include. But order really includes those things that help us, even as society, have order. So that there's rules and consequences. So those are established and they get communicated to the residents. So they know what the expectations are. And there's a process for if they violate the rules that there are possible consequences that they're informed of. So it's not random. And also in here, in order is an orientation process. So ensuring that there's a good orientation for the residents, because they don't come in knowing what they need to know to be successful in the program. Just like you guys are going through an orientation, you have to learn, and then you're going to go to your facility, your positions, and learn what the expectations are and how to do different logouts and sign people in and out, and what the rooms are supposed to look like, and how to make calls. You guys are going to learn all of that through that process. They need that time too. They need to learn what the expectations are and how to be successful. So what we can't do is just assume that they know, or even just hand them a packet of information and say, here, read this, that's what you need to know. Because that doesn't help them be successful. Many of our clients read probably at a 6th or 5th grade level or lower, so it's really hard. And just like all of us, if we get stuck with a whole bunch of papers, how many of us really sit and read every little thing, okay? So making sure that they have the resources, but we give that information to them. Take them on a tour, let them know what time lunch is, what time dinner is, you know, the expectations for their own client housekeeping detail that they get assigned, what that looks like, how to communicate with staff. Making sure too, one of the big issues right now is many of our facilities have different statuses of client. So with each one of those, each one brings different things that they're allowed to do and not allowed to do, limitations or things that are permissible. So some clients can have community time, some can't. Some get overnight passes for 24 hours or 48 hours. Some get them for 56 hours. Some clients can go to the gym to work out. Some clients can't. So there's all of these things. What we have to communicate to is make sure that the clients understand that if they have a question, they need to ask staff, because what Barbara may be able to do may not be what I'm able to do. So if I go to her to get information, I say, hey, can I go to Chuck E. Cheese today with my kid? She's gonna say, yeah, but my status may not let me do that, okay? So that's where sometimes confusion and frustration comes in, is because we're getting information, they're getting their information for other clients. And since we do have so many different statuses sometimes mixed in the same facility, it's really important that clients understand that, and that they should come to staff if they have a specific question. Okay, so those two things are super important to making sure that there's order within the facility, and everybody understands there's rules, there's consequences, and there's also the orientation to be able to understand those expectations and rules. Okay, section 4 is care. So in section 4 with care, we talked about this food service is one of the things. So making sure we've got those meals, they meet that mandatory standard, but then there's some other standards that aren't mandatory that tie into food service, doing things like refrigerator temperature checks and water temperature checks. That sanitization of the eating utensils and plates and all of that stuff is happening. What other things can you think of in care? Yep, absolutely. So tomorrow you guys are doing first aid CPR training. Woohoo! You heard it, wear comfortable clothes if you missed that for tomorrow. So, but part of being in the facility is making sure everybody's trained on first aid and CPR, so you know how to respond and provide that immediate medical care, as well as, you know, call 911. So we have agreements with our local hospitals to provide medical care as well to our clients, so that those services are available. We don't deny medical attention. None of us, I don't think, are doctors or nurses in here, so we're not trained to make those decisions. So if the client needs medical attention, there's processes that we do and follow so that they can get that medical care. Also, all of our facilities have AED machines, defibrillators, so that's be part of your training tomorrow as well. But having that training, that they have access also to like dental care, so mental health care, medication. So those type of care things, as well as personal hygiene items, clean linens, bedding. So clients get pillows, mattress, blankets, sheets, all of that is provided Depending on your facility, most of those get, the sheets get changed out and laundered by an external service provider. So the clients just have to change their beds once a week. So section care is also where our homicide suicide prevention plan is. Talked about medication. Those are pretty much the highlights with what falls into the care category. And then section 5 is program and activity. Any case managers in here? One case manager. So this section is really focused on what the case manager does with the client then, when they're with us. So making sure we do an assessment, we do a program plan, what's the client going to work on, and goals while they're with us. Meeting with the client regularly and documenting that progress, providing transitional assistance, helping find housing, employment, pro-social recreational activities and opportunities. So this section really focuses on that client's activity and programming while they're with us, and what the case manager works with them on while they're in their program. Okay? Section 6 is justice. And this kind of looks at it two ways. So we've got, first of all, justice for the client. So there's a grievance procedure. If they are charged with a violation or an infraction, something that, an incident, that they have rights, that they can give their side of the story, they can make a statement. We have, if it's a major violation or they accumulate so many points where their program's in danger of being terminated, that there's a hearing. And they can sit down and present their case and call witnesses. If, staff has said that this client was out in the community off itinerary, and another client says, well, no, he was right here in his bed all the time. So they can have an opportunity, being able to address those concerns. I said in the past where our clients may have gotten mad, they'd want to run away from the problem, they want to fight, do something that's not appropriate when faced with challenge, kind of teaching them, walking through those steps of how to respond. And as well as if they don't agree with something, that they can submit agreements as a way to do that. So also having policies and procedures on not discriminating against our clients for any reason, and providing those services to them that they need and are assessed to need. And then the other side of justice is justice for the community. So we look at making restitution. If they have a restitution, court costs, fines, child support, things like that. Also providing community service and restorative justice. So taking accountability and responsibility and restoring some of those things back to the community that they've taken through their crimes. Okay? Section 7 is administration and management. So what's left? What haven't we talked about?
Our responsibility.
Who's ours? Who's us?
Staff.
Okay, so what specifically?
Performance metrics.
That's all encompassing, and that'll be my last under outcome measures. You snuck ahead. So, training. So for staff, you guys are in this class this week, Introduction to Community Corrections and getting training. That's a requirement because we, how fair would it be if we just sent you out to the facility and you didn't get any training and it was like, figure it out. So that new hires, they go through training as well as requirements for existing staff. So staff, I've been here 19 years. So I still have to get training every year. I have training requirements that I have to get 40 hours of training every year. It doesn't stop just because you've been here. So just like you're going through this class, you won't have to do this class again, but there's additional training that you'll constantly be receiving and ongoing, either through the facility, through coming to end services here, through webinars, things like that, that it's ongoing training. It doesn't stop. personnel and HR. So you guys went through things, you had to do an application. We had to do background checks and get clearance for that. You will have a process for getting an evaluation and get feedback. There's a grievance process for staff. So all of that stuff for staff comes into this section, as well as things in our business office and fiscal policies. Nobody here right now is probably volunteers, right? So you want paid. So there's a process for that to make sure that that happens. And there's an accounting system, and there's expenses, and make sure we get our bills paid, that the lights stay on, and the water bill gets paid, and all of that stuff with documentation that has to be done. We have to have a financial audit. So ACA doesn't actually audit the finances, but they tell you you need to have a financial audit. So those experts, because that takes a long time, come in and have to do that. So we have to prove that we've done that as part of the accreditation. So I said that none of you guys are volunteers, but we have volunteers, we have interns, but there has to be a process for them as well. To make sure that they are people, again, they have to go through a background check and an application process to make sure that we're bringing the right people in to expose our residents to that are positive role models and going to provide beneficial services to the clients. Things like that govern our board, our quality assurance processes, internal audits and internal monitorings to make sure we're doing what we say we're going to do. Okay, so all this is actually the biggest section of the whole manual. Is kind of those everything else administration that doesn't necessarily have all the impact directly on the clients, but it makes sure that everything else is running so those things can happen. And then in our policy and procedure, you'll see in there's a special procedure section. So those are the things that apply for some other reason in our world here at Alvis that ACA doesn't have a requirement for, but maybe the state of Ohio does, or the Bureau of Prisons does. Or we're also CARF accredited for our outpatient substance abuse services. So maybe it's one of these other entities that has a requirement that we need to meet and have a policy and procedure on. So it has grown significantly this last year, so that right now I think we're probably at about 42 of those that fall into that special procedures. Some of them are things that Alvis decided that we needed to develop, or our board wanted us to have. So those type of things like transportation of clients and ensuring that we're safely transporting clients, and use of cell phones and agency vehicles and things like that ACA hasn't necessarily caught up with yet, and it's not specific and as universally applicable, but there are things that we need here at Alvis. Okay? So then finally we have outcome measures, and these 253 standards for the most part are, we have to show that documentation. Well, across the board, we have to show documentation that we're doing it. And in that audit process, it used to be that we would have to show documentation of, they would say, okay, show me that you do fire drills and you have a fire safety plan. So we could show them fire drills, fire safety plan for the 3 years. What they wouldn't know necessarily is, well, did you have any fires? Was anybody hurt? How much damage was done because of the fires? You have vehicles, okay? You do vehicle safety inspections. You have that process. Well, how many miles did you guys drive? Were there any accidents? Who was injured because of those accidents? How much damage was done to those vehicles? So these standards are performance-based now. There are about 160 outcomes that we have to record and report on as part of our audit process. And it includes those things now. So it used to be you could get accredited and you could have all your documentation to say, well, we've done case plans, we do termination plans, we have all of these things in place, but you didn't really know what was going on in the program. You didn't know how many people successfully completed, how many people left employed, how many hours of community service did you do, how much restitution was repaid. All of those things now, we now have to report on. So again, that's where you guys come in and that documentation to make sure that it gets reported, because we now have to track that information. Like with food service, How many suspected cases of foodborne illness, were there? We have to record human resources numbers. So how many code of ethics violations occurred? How many training hours were received by staff? How many outside training events were received? So all of that stuff, so then they look at really the meat of, okay, what are you doing? So it's not just those standards and having the documentation, but now it's the numbers. And what does that show and what does that reflect? So, as I said, going through this, the audit process right now, so we're getting ready to gear up for a very big spring and probably most of you guys will be at one of these facilities that's actually going to be going to an ACA audit in the spring. So it will be Longstreet, Jackson Pike, and Allen Creek, as well as our Toledo and Lima facilities. We'll be going through ACA audits in the spring. So you'll get to so you're going into a facility as we're in the final gear up stages for that. Facilities have been collecting and submitting documentation for the last 3 years. We're getting ready with that process. The audit is actually, feels like it lasts forever, but it's quick, it's a day and a half. So the auditors come in, there's 2 of them, they are correctional professionals with at least typically some experience now in community corrections. A lot of them are retired from their positions, and they will look at all that documentation, so all 253 standards for all 3 years. For all of those facilities, making sure checking policies and procedures and checking the proof that we're doing it, as well as looking at those outcome measures. They will interview clients, they will interview staff, they may sit in on groups, they have to sample the food, they have to attend all 3 shifts and interview staff on all 3 shifts. So don't think, well, I'm working third shift, it doesn't matter, I'm good, I'm safe. Nope, we will be at your facility on 3rd shift, I promise. So, to make sure and to look for consistency that things are looking the same throughout that process. So those auditors then prepare a report and evaluate and give you feedback. They do not ultimately make the decision. It then goes back to ACA, and there's actually a panel hearing that happens that we have to sit in front of a panel of commissioners who are elected from the association, and we have to respond. So if there's questions or problems that we had, that's where if we have to do a plan of action or respond to something we didn't meet, that we have to do it at that point. They're the ones who decide if that plan of action is acceptable or if we get a waiver. So that process, then it's a couple months out. So, for example, the Terra Collins Reentry Center in Chillicothe, I don't think anybody's here from there, are there?
Right, yeah.
Oh, look at that. You guys just got your initial accreditation like 2 weeks ago. So they had gone through their audit in May, and then they had their hearing that Jamie went to a couple weeks ago in Boston, and we got the award for their initial accreditation. So they've gone through that process. The next audit will be 3 years from last May. So they have already started collecting their documentation for that next audit. Okay, it's upstairs in my office right now that they've already turned it in. So it doesn't stop. So we don't think, oh, usually they get like a month off and then we're right back at it. Well, it's fresh in everybody's mind. One of the things that they, in relationship to the outcome measures, that the commissioners and the panel hearing can decide is if maybe all of your documentation is good, but they see something funny on those outcome measures. They have some concerns. Maybe you didn't have very many clients successfully complete. There was a high number of AWOLs and escapes from the facility. They can put you on probation, and they'll come back out and do a follow-up and kind of make sure that nothing's going on that they have concerns about continuation. So it is possible to get 100% and 100% on those standards and still have problems. I've seen facilities go through that, get put on probation, and get a follow-up monitoring visit because of their outcome measures. Okay, so we have to take those seriously and really look at making sure we are recording that information and we're able to present that accurate information. Okay, so again, that's where you guys all help us out with that process. Okay, so that's your introduction to like the fun world of like compliance and accreditation and why we need your help to get that all to happen. So, any questions by Faye?
What facilities did you say were going to be in the spring audit?
Jackson Pike, Long Street, Allen Creek, Lima, and Toledo.
How often does Carter accreditation happen?
3 years. Typically, you can get a 1 year, right? Or you can get a 3 year. And we got ours in the fall for a 3 year.
That's for all the facilities?
No, for,
the
that's more complicated.
Currently only for the Recovery Choices program at the Columbus Reentry Center, and hopefully we'll be expanding that to the other locations as well.
Because that was the only one that existed when we started. So now we're expanding that behavioral health to our satellites, additional locations. So we intend to expand that.
Thank you.
Right.
Do you have the status of this process for any of the women's facilities on Bryan Road?
Yes, they are, their last audit was last July. They are just a year in from their last audit. So they got their accreditation in January of this year. So they are a year into collections. So they're working on it now.
I was just wondering about Breslin, is it just?
They
open in July,
are, so they are not, so they, our facilities have to be open and operational for at least 12 months before you can start the process. So, and that's why TCRC just went through theirs. They were actually open for about 2 years before we brought them into the process and kind of completed that. Long Street just opened in November of this year, so they are just gonna be coming on their year, and so it'll be their initial audit in the spring of this year. We're going to try and rack them into the other 2 women's facilities with Dunning and Price, if the state will let us, because they want us to be accredited as soon as possible, and we would be open for really about 2 years before that would happen. So we'll have to see if they're okay with that. But they are just in the initial parts of that. Any other questions? Okay, well, I think you've got de-escalation now, so I will let Marcus know that you're done. If you guys need to take a quick break, probably now's a good time for that de-escalation, because I think that's 2 hours. 3, we'll be close to that, so. Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.